or knowing that it's Monday morning at 10 a.m. This is the season when it becomes very difficult to remember what day and what time anything or anybody is. I hope everybody had beautiful first days of Yom Tov. And we are going to do a Rashi Sikha from Chumash Bereshis. So we're going to start the year off right. And I don't know about anybody else, but for me, this is absolutely anchoring and very important for my mental health. So thank you for being here. Let's look at the psukim surrounding the Rashi that the Rebbe is going to analyze in the Sikha, and look at that particular Rashi. But before that, I forgot to announce that we're learning in the schos of Refuah Shlema for Harav Yosef Shlomo ben Risha, and in the schos of Refuah Shlema for all those who need a refuah in Eretz HaKodesh and anywhere else, in fact, and as a schos that the hostages should all come home healthy in body and in mind miraculously, and that there should already be an end to this terrible matzav. Yes, we have a lot to ask for. We're looking at Perek Aleph in Parshas Bereshis, in Chumash Bereshis, and let's begin with Pasuk Chav Zayin. Pasuk Chav Zayin tells us, Vayivra Elokim es ha'adam b'tzalmai, b'tzelem Elokim bara isai zachor nekeva bara isam. God created man in his designated mold, and he created him with God's form. He created them male and female. Vayivarach isam Elokim, vayemer lahem Elokim, pru orvu umilu es haaretz v'chivshuha. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, populate the earth, and take control of it, or do bidgas hayam, and rule over the fish of the sea, uba'if hashamayim, and the birds of the heaven, uv'chol chaya harameses ala aretz, and rule over every living being that moves on the ground. Chavtes, vayomer lakim, hine nesati lachem es kol esev zoirea zera asher pnei kol haaretz. God further said to them, I have hereby given you every plant that reproduces by seed, which is on the face of the entire earth. Ves kola eis asher by pri eitz zerea zera, and all the trees that have tree fruit which reproduce by seed. Lachem yiyeh la'achla, that they shall be for you to eat. Ulechol chayes haaretz, ulechol oif hashamayim, ulechol rameis ala aretz asher by nefesh chaya. And for all the animals of the land, for all the birds of the heaven, and for everything that creeps on the earth that has a living soul. As kol yerek esav la'achla, I have given all the greenery of plants them to eat, and so it was. And the Rashi that we're looking at is Rashi Chavtes. The deeper hamaschil is lachem yiyeh la'achla, ulechol chayas haaretz, that they shall be for you to eat and for all the animals of the land. And Rashi says, Hishva lahem hakasuv behemes v'chayes lamachal. The verse equates animals and beasts to human with regards to food. V'lo hirsha la'adam u'le'ishtay lahamis birya v'lechol basar. And it did not permit man and his wife to kill any creature or to eat its flesh. Ach kol yerek esav yochlu yachad kulam. But they were all to eat only of the various types of vegetation. Yachad kulam, in commonality. Ukeshabo b'nei Noach, but in the times of the sons of Noach, hitir lahen basar. Hashem permitted them to eat meat, shenemar, as it says there, kol remes asher hu chai v'gomer, every moving creature that lives. The implication is it will be for you to eat. She'etarti la'adam harishon, ki yerek esav she'etarti la'adam harishon, just like I permitted the first man to eat vegetation, nasati lachem es kol, I have now given you everything to eat, meaning including meat of animals. Okay, that's the Rashi. Now we're going to go into the Sikha. La'achar sipor brias chayes ha'aretz brias adam v'ishta b'yem hashishi l'maisa Bereshis. After recounting to us about the creation of animals and then later the creation of Adam and his wife on the sixth day of creation, Koilel dibar shem la'adam v'chava v'yivarach gomer purvu gomer urdu'u b'tgas hayam, inclusive of Hashem saying to Adam and Chava that he blessed them and that they should be fruitful and multiply and that they should lord over the fish of the sea and the other aspects of creation. Meifim bekasuf shnei psukim, there appear another two psukim, bekesha lemachal adam v'chayis, and these two psukim address the eating habits of humanity and animals, and those are the last two psukim that we read, Chavtes and Lamed. Vayomer Lakim, Hashem said, "Hinei lechem es kol esav zerei zera." I have given you all the vegetation. Lechem yeh la'achla. It should be for you to eat. And the next pasuk says, "Ulachol chayes haaretz," and all the animals of the earth, ulachol oif hashamayim, and all the birds of the sky, I have given vegetation to eat. Ub perushay alasar, and in his commentary on those psukim, Hetik Rashi asiyum hapasuk harishon yachad imaschalas hapasuk hasheni. Rashi does something interesting in his Dibra Maschil. He cites the end of the first pasuk and the beginning of the second. Okay, so he fuses the two psukim, and Dibra Maschil is lachem yeh la'achla, which are the last words of pasuk Chavtes, Ulechol chayes haaretz, which are the first three words of pasuk Lamed. And under that Dibur HaMaschil, Uperish, and he explains, Hishva lehem behemoth v'chayes lamachal. They were compared to the beasts, and meaning domestic animals and wild animals in terms of their eating habits. And it was not permitted to Adam and his wife to kill an animal creature and to eat its flesh. But rather, they should both, in commonality, eat vegetation. They should subsist on a herbivorous diet. Kavanas hadvarim b'pashtosi. Simply speaking, it seems that Rashi's intention is Shahashva zu, this comparison, Hishva lehem behemoth v'chayes lamachal, that they were compared to behemoths and chayes, to domestic animals and to wild animals in terms of their diet. Ba l'lamed comes to teach she'adam v'ishto hayu asurim b'achilas basar. On the face of it, it seems that what Rashi's coming to underscore, but that the psukim seem to make clear, that Adam and Chava can't eat meat. They cannot be carnivores. And like the Gur Aryeh super commentary and Rashi explains, Ma behema v'chaya enim oichlim rak esav, just like domestic animals and wild animals don't eat anything but grasses and other vegetation. Hachinami, the same thing, Adam, achilasai esav v'yerek v'loi midi acharise. Coming to teach that it's the same thing for humanity, that their diet will be grasses and vegetation and nothing else. But seemingly it's difficult to explain that this is all that Rashi wants to tell us. And like the Lavush asks on Rashi, Aleph, how can you prove from the fact that humanity is compared to animals in terms of the fact that they could eat vegetation? How do you derive from that? How do you extrapolate that people are forbidden from eating meat. Bisha sha'anu rayim b'muchash, while we see very clearly shekama uchama min hachayis hinen chayis toifas ha'echlis basar behema. We see that many animals are animals of prey. They're carnivores. They eat meat. So how do you infer from the comparison between people and animals that a human being is not allowed to eat meat when so many animals do in fact eat meat? And in the brackets, the Rebbe says, "V'doiche gadol leimar," and it's very, you're very hard pressed to say, "Sherashi svirle kashitas ha'imrim," that Rashi believes, like those that say, "Shekoidem achet loy hayu chayes toifres ba'elam," that before the sin that brought upon the change to all of the universe, there were no animals of prey. But it was only after the chait that their nature was changed. Why is it difficult to say that Rashi aligns his opinion with this opinion? Because something so novel, Rashi would have to state, or at least to allude to this. Somewhere in his vast commentary on the Torah, he should have said this, or he should have at least alluded to this. So we have a question. The Levush is asking, how do you derive from these psukim that a human is not allowed to eat flesh? Bahara Ein Perush, Eliezer Mizrahi, another commentary on Rashi, he explains Hakavana b'hashva zu shala adam l'chayes, that the intention of this comparison between people and animals, shekashem shleihuta l'chaye lechol as ha'adam kach leihutar la'adam lahamiz beri lechol b'sara, that the comparison is just like animals were not permitted to kill and eat people, so too are people not permitted to kill these beasts and to eat their flesh. That's how the Re'im explains the hashva'ah, the comparison. Aval doichik lefarish came b'kavanas Rashi. But it's very difficult. You're very hard pressed to explain this to be Rashi's intention. Ki al pizeh, because based on this, ha'ikar chasam min ha'sefer. Then we're missing the main thing in Rashi's commentary. Sharei imkain, because if it would be like the Re'im wants to say, Rashi lahaskir is isur achayis le'echalas adam. Rashi would have to first say that animals were forbidden from eating people. But he doesn't say that. So, our first question is, from where can you prove that the comparison between behemoths, chayas, and humanity means that man, generic man, humanity, is forbidden from eating animal flesh? That's question number one. Beis. Ume'idach gisa. And on the other hand, hikushis hagor aryeh, like the question of the Gor Aryeh, Madua niskakim anu lehekesh zeh, hishvachule lemachal. Why would we need this whole comparison in the first place? Kedei lilmayit she'adam v'ishta asurim b'achilas basar. In order to learn that humanity are forbidden from eating flesh, meat of animals. Halay hadavar yadua lanu mimashmas pshat hakasuf. Isn't this the intention of what the pasuk is saying? Sharei nemar kan hini nasati lachem es kol esav gomer lachem yelachla. The pasuk says, "Here I've given you all of vegetation. This should be for you to eat. This is your diet." Ubazeh, and with these words, Hiter Kadosh Baruch Hu Achilas Yerek Esav. Hashem permitted humans to eat all of vegetation. Ubalash Rashi Basim Peroshay, and in Rashi's the end of his commentary, Ki Yerek Esav Shehitarti La'adam Arishan. Like the greenery, like the grass, like the vegetation that I permitted to Adam Arishan. V'hainu sheyerek esav dafka hitarti v'loy davar achar basar. This means, simply speaking, that vegetation I'm allowing you to eat, but not meat. So in other words, why does Rashi have to go in to the whole comparison? It seems we have all the information we need in the pasuk right there. Gimel. B'choloifen, either way, v'hua ikar, and this is the main thing. In Yanai shall perish Rashi al Torah, ulefarish pshuta shel mikra. The stated mandate of Rashi in his commentary on the Torah, and the Rebbe reminds us, not necessarily on the Gemara, but on the Torah, is to give us the pshuta shel mikra, to give us pshat. Umahu akishikan b'pshuta shel mikra sheba Rashi liyashi b'perushay hishva lehem behemes v'chayis lamachal. What is the difficulty that Rashi is coming to address on the level of pshat? That he comes and he says that animals, domestic animals and wild animals, are being compared to people. What is the difficulty? What is bothering Rashi? So those are the three questions. Again, how can you prove from the pasuk that it's prohibited for human beings to eat the flesh of animals? Especially Rashi saying, I'm comparing them, and animals eat meat. So if we're being compared to animals, where are we learning that human beings can't eat meat? Second question, on the other hand, why do we need the whole comparison at all? We should just read the pasuk. The pasuk is very clear. It's telling us, Hashem says, here's your diet. Look at this. I've put in front of you all of vegetation. And the third question is, either way, let's get back to basics. Rashi is all about teaching pshat. Al pi pshat, what is bothering Rashi? Ma kashel Rashi, what is difficult? Beis. Gam matzinu kan kama diyukim b'lashon Rashi. The Rebbe says those are the three biggest questions, but there are also some diyukim, some specificities that we want to understand. Aleph. Lama nakat kan Rashi lashon bilti regila. Why does Rashi cite here an unusual or anomalous term, v'lo hirsha, and he did not permit? That term, that verbiage, signon shall sipor devarim, is more in line with storytelling. V'lo kasab b'signonai haragil, and he didn't write in his regular style, aval basar asor, but meat is forbidden, or something like that. In other words, it's more in the storytelling style than in the technical imparting of information style. If you want to just give information, you just say, I have a basar asor, but meat is impermissible, it's forbidden. Instead, Rashi says, v'lo hirsha, but he did not permit. So the Rebbe wants to understand that. Beis. Rashi diek v'haisib v'lshainai. Rashi specifies and adds in his terminology, Shaha Isar al Adam ve'ishtahu lahamis birya v'lechal basar. We know that in general, Rashi is short and he doesn't use extra words. So here Rashi adds that it's forbidden for man and his wife to kill a living creature and to eat its flesh. And he could have done it in a much shorter and simple way, which is that Adam and his wife were not permitted to eat flesh. Umizem mashma. But from the way that Rashi writes it, it's understood, l'ch'era, seemingly, shachilas basa shel beria shemesa me'ala muteres, that eating meat from an animal that died on its own, died in nature, as it were, is permitted. So now the question is, what in the Pshut Shel Mikra forces Rashi to come to this conclusion that you can eat meat from an animal as long as you don't kill it, as long as you don't take its life? Gimel. L'shema hutzach Rashi lichpol shuv uba'arichas ach kol yerek esav yochlu yachat kolam. Why does Rashi have to double back and repeat, seemingly, and in very verbose manner? We're using a lot of words. Ach kol yerek esav, but yes, all of vegetation, all the grasses and everything that grows, yochlu yachat kulam. They will eat together or in common, humanity and animals. Why is this necessary? What does this add to what Rashi is teaching us after he has already clearly said humanity can not eat meat? Ubefrat, and especially, especially because the pasuk itself gives us exactly this information, that vegetation will be the diet of both humanity and animals. So why does Rashi feel compelled to repeat this? Those are the three more specific questions that the Rebbe adds to the three more general questions. Gimel. Lahalon, Mamshich Rashi Mefarish. Then Rashi continues and explains. Ukshabo b'nei Noach, when the sons of Noach came, Hiter lahem basar, they were permitted to eat meat. Shenemar, Rashi brings down the pasuk, Kol remes asher hu chai kaimer ki yerek esef she'itarti la'adam harisha nasati lachem eskol. And this is from Noach, Perek Tes, Pasuk Gimel, that from all the living animals, like vegetation that I allowed to Adam Harishon, I'm allowing to you all of them. Okay. V'hinei muvan hatam shehutzach Rashi lahadgish tekev v'parshasenu shachilas basar hutra levnei Noach. It's understood why Rashi feels the necessity to underscore immediately in this parsha, when we're nowhere near the story of Noach yet, that meat was permitted to Bnei Noach. Why is this understandable? So first the Rebbe repeats a klal, a rule. Kefishin is bar ba'avar kama pa'amim, as has been explained in the past a number of times. Afal pisha ein darka sharashi liyashe b'peirushay kaishi hamisayir b'limud kosov shenemar lahalam b'tarish b'chtav. Even though it is not the norm for Rashi to reconcile difficulties that arise only later in Teresh B'chtav, and how much more so something that needs to be reconciled with something that we will learn in Teresh B'al the Yeser Alkain, and even more so, Ma'achas Shapirish Rashi Elatarihu Lefi Pshuta Shel Mikra, Ein Kol Hakrashia Perish Behetem Lamaskanas Inin Lahalacha. And for sure, because Rashi is set to explain the Pshuta Shel Mikra, there's no imperative for him to explain in accordance with how halacha is set. Despite all of this, Me'achar Sharashi Mefarish is a kosov of Ben Chamish Mikra, but because Rashi himself says that he wants to explain the Pshuta Shel Mikra for everyone, including the Mechamish Lemikra, the 5-year-old, as referenced in Pirkei Avos, it's beginning to learn Chumash. Muchachu lischashev b'metzius hanires le'enov shel Chumash lemikra. He has to reckon with the reality that the Chumash lemikra confronts, which is people are eating meat. He had hamburgers or he had hot dogs and French fries the night before. I don't know if those are considered meat, but whatever. But the 5-year-old child knows that people eat meat. So although we've explained that Rashi doesn't necessarily relate to contradictions that will arise later in the Torah Shebechsav, and even less so in Torah Shebal Peh, and even less so in Halacha, but since the Ben Chumash Mikra is learning this and has a question, because his reality includes the eating of meat, Rashi has to explain it here. And therefore, Huchach Rashi lehavir alasar shebedaris habayim hutra achilas basar. And therefore, Rashi right here has to explain that after some generations that were to come, meat became permissible. Ki perusha kan shelo yirsha hu b'stira limitzius haniris leven chamesh shabehema nishchetes ubsar nechal. Because very simply speaking, what he is saying here, that man was not permitted to eat meat, is a contradiction to what the Ben Chamish Mikra sees, b'mitzius, sees, practically speaking, in their life, that animals are shechted and the meat is eaten. Okay, so we understand why Rashi has to mention this. Aval eino muvan, but what's not understood about this last aspect of Rashi, Aleph, kedei lahadgish prat zeh, in order to underscore this detail, that later people would eat meat, dai lahedias hadin bilvad, it would have been enough to just cite that when Bnei Noach came around, later in history, they were permitted to eat meat, as you will read later. Something like this. What difference does it make? Why is it important to include the exact verse that would make this clear in the Torah? If all you're trying to do is explain to the Mechamish Mikra, who's confused, that it's true, yes, you eat meat today, but there was a time where humans weren't allowed to eat meat of animals, and that's because when Bnei Noach came around, the Eibishter permitted it. Why does he have to cite chapter and verse? Why cite a pasuk? Beis. Gam imra Rashi tzarech b'havas hapasuk me'ezeh tam shahu. If Rashi did, for whatever reason, feel that it was important to bring down the pasuk, hayaloi lahatik rakas hascholas hapasuk, he could have cited just the beginning, which is very in consonance with what Rashi does. He could have cited kol remes asher hu chay lachem yelachla. Every creeping thing that is alive will be food for you. Because this clearly explains that Hashem permitted people to eat meat. Vilama, so why? And the Rebbe asks two questions here. Okay, because again, the premise of the question is that if that's all that Rashi wants to broadcast, that later on in history people will be able to eat meat. And so first the question is, why do you have to bring us a pasuk? Second question is, and if you do feel that you have to bring us a pasuk for whatever reason, why do you have to cite, why do you have to quote so much of it? You could have just said the first few words. But once you're quoting so much of the pasuk, two more questions. V'lama aleph hishmit Rashi sa'ikar lachem yeh la'achla v'ramaz al kach begoyim b'vad. Why does Rashi delete or not cite what seems to be the main key words in this pasuk, which is lachem yeh la'achla, this will be for you to eat, and he just alludes to these words with begoymer, etc. That's on one hand. And Beis u'meidach, but on the other hand, Haisif arichazu, he continues in elongated fashion, and he adds, Ki yerek esef shitarti la'adam arisha nasati lachem eskol. Like the vegetation that I permitted to Adam Harishon, now I am permitting you everything. Okay? So these are the questions that the Rebbe has. First, general questions, then specific questions, and then more specific questions on the last part of Rashi, where Rashi explains that things will change later in history. Dalet. V'habir b'chol zeh. And the explanation is going to hinge on understanding the question that Rashi is addressing here in the first place. Because we still really don't know what is bothering Rashi, because so much of what Rashi is saying seems to already be in the pasuk. So here are the questions. B'peirushay kan ba Rashi l'taretz kama she'elas b'psukim elu. Here are the questions that Rashi is really coming to address. Aleph, ma hamokim b'chlal lahedia b'sipor ma'aseh Bereshis mahim hadvarim shebnei ha'adam v'achayis mutarim v'rashayim lech. Why is it even important in the story of creation to supply us with a menu of food items that are permissible to people and animals to eat? L'ch'ayra, hakasuf oisekan b'chlalos inin habriya bilvad v'lei b'tzarchei hanivorim. Seemingly, the narrative here concerns the general creation and not the subsidiary needs of every aspect in creation. For instance, we don't have a pasuk that says that certain plants will need to be watered, certain plants will need sun, etc. So Rashi's first question is, or what Rashi is hoping we are concerned with, is why this digression into the needs, the nutritional needs of human beings and animals. Habracha is pru urvu goimer. The fact that the Torah says pru urvu, you should be fruitful and multiply. Hein chelek mimaisa bereshis. This is part of the creation story. Why? Because al yadan mizbar ketzad yesh hemshach v'kim l'briya adayem hazeh. Because it's only through these words, pru urvu, that it's explained how there will be the continuation of creation until now. Ki yitzurim elu nivru ba'ofen shiyu parim v'rabim. Because this pasuk is teaching us that these creations were vested with generation properties, with the ability to propagate themselves. That's important to the story of creation. I mean, obviously now we take it for granted. But what's to say that it had to be that way? So that is necessary. It's also understood why the commandment or the mandate to rule or lord over other aspects of creation is contained and included in the story of creation. Because again, this is a description of how humanity was created. That humanity would be different from all other aspects of creation. Like it says, Nasa Adam B'Tzalmenu Kidnusenu or V'Yirdu B'Tgas Hayam. Hashem says we'll create humanity in our form, in our image, and they will lord over all aspects of creation. Sharia Kosuv V'Yivra L'Kim Adam B'Tzalma Goymer V'Yomer Lehem Goymer Urdu Ba'Behem Shalazeh. These things are connected. So we understand that telling us pru urvu is again a description of humanity and how creation would continue ad infinitum. And we also understand that telling us that human beings were created in the image of God and that they would lord over the rest of creation describes them. But everything in the verses that explain what humans will eat and what animals will eat, that's not understood. How does this connect to creation itself? That's question number one. Base. And afilu im yimatze tam lekach shetzivu ze la'adam nagel inikan, adayin ein muvan. And even if you're going to find a reason for why it's imperative for this information about menu items to come right here in the story of creation, it's still not understood. L'shema hayra kadosh baruch hu la'adam v'ishtay ma yeh machalam shel chayes aretz v'ayif hashamayim. Why does Hashem have to teach Adam and his wife what animals will be eating and what birds will be eating? And on top of this, to add, the birds that were created on the fifth day ate nothing until Hashem gave Adam and Chava this information. Is that what we're meant to believe? And we can't explain that these psukim come as a continuation to the commandment to lord over all the fish of the sea and so on and so forth. Hainu, meaning, maybe you want to argue that after Hashem appointed humanity to be in charge of all living things, he's teaching them what they should eat. But seemingly, this is not the content of the commandment to lord or to take over or to reign, that's the word I'm looking for, over all the other living creatures. So in Seif Dalet, the Rebbe says the real question that Rashi is coming to address is, what are these psukim doing in this narrative right here? Doesn't seem to fit. Hey, ukidei liyashev she'elas elu, and in order to address these questions, hetik Rashi min hakasav azateos lachem yeh la'achla u'lechol chayas haaretz. Rashi cites in his Dibur HaMaschil the last three words of Pasuk Chavtes and the first three words of Pasuk Lamed, Hamikashreis bin Shnei Hapsukim Bivav Hamachaber. He wants to underscore that these two psukim are connected, and they're connected through the Vav Hamachaber, the Vav that connects them. Ubir is Perish HaKasuf. And then he explains his understanding of the psukim. And he begins by saying, Hishva lahem behemus v'chayas lamach. That they are compared to behemus and chayas when it comes to food. Hakavana b'chibor siyim ha'pasuk harishon l'pasuk hasheni eina lelamdenu isurim ulashmenu ma rashaya adam lechol ma al chayas lechol. The intention of connecting these two psukim is not to teach us what is forbidden and to teach us what is permitted for a person to eat and what animals can eat. Ela hamavukash b'kasuf kan hu davar echad bilvat. But the intention here is one thing, and only one thing. Lahadgish es hatzad hashava sheba adam ubechayes. The mention of what they can eat is tangential. The real intention is to compare animals to humans. B'negeya l'macholim. How are they being compared? Relative to their food. And the Rebbe is going to, of course, amplify this. First, the Rebbe says, Makar Isra Habasar al Adam Be'ishtay, Lo Hirsha, Hu Achen Mimashmaz HaPasuk HaRishain. The source for the Isser, the prohibition of a person eating meat, that it wasn't permitted, is in fact understood from Pasuk Chavtes. Because there the pasuk allows only vegetation. So you can infer easily that if the pasuk says this is what you can eat, you can't eat anything else. You can't eat meat. So look again, please, at the psukim. We understand what people can eat, and we can infer what they cannot eat from Pasuk Chavtes. But what's with the Vav HaChibur hastening to continue to address the diet of animals? Kilaymar, this is to say, in the brackets, Amna machayas eichles leirak yerek esav elagam basar. It's true that animals don't only eat a herbivorous diet. They don't only eat vegetation, they also eat meat. Aval yesh kan hashva letzad echad b'negei lemachal adam shahamachal shaloi esav hugam ma'acholam shalachayis v'behemus. But there is one way in which a comparison is being made. And the comparison is that human beings eat vegetation and animals eat vegetations. V'lachein herech Rashi v'kefel shuvas hashva akol yerek esav yochlu yachad kulam. And therefore, Rashi gives us an elongated shot here, and he doubles back on the comparison, and he says, and all vegetation you will be able to eat in common. But why is it necessary to give us this comparison? Vav. Umadua ha'hashva shel meichel ha'adam le'meichel chayes ha'aretz chulei negas l'sipor brias ha'adam. Why is this necessary to the narrative about creation of humanity? Okay, good. Fine. So we're gonna eat a vegetarian diet. And in this way, we are compared to animals who also eat vegetation, albeit in addition to the meat. How is this seminal to the creation story? So the Rebbe says, Harei Davar, move on. Here's the way it's understood. Tchila misaper kosuv es mailas ha'adam al kol shar ha'nevran. First, the psukim, the narrative, talk about the way in which humanity is higher than the rest of creation. All the advantages, all the superlative advantages of humanity over the rest of creation. Shanivra b'tzelem elokim, human beings were created in the image of Hashem, and therefore humanity is going to reign and rule over the rest of creation, or duv goimer. So that's first of all. But as a continuation to rolling out all the amazing and unique and unparalleled properties of the human beings, Madgish HaKasuv, the pasuk underscores Hishvalahem behemus v'chayas lamach. Rashi explains that the pasuk is coming to say, but there is a way in which we are compared to domestic animals and wild animals, and that is in our diet. Mibli habeit al hayisa shala adam elyon el shar hanivraim. Harehu nivra. Irrespective of the fact that humanity is higher on the hierarchy above all other creations. But what are these psukim coming to tell us? Harehu nivra. Humans are still creations. That God created in such a way that when it comes to their food, when it comes to nutrition, upon which human beings depend for their vitality, we will be similar to the animals. In other words, we're so great and we're so great and we're so great and we're so great, but we're going to be brought to our knees by something so absolutely necessary to our existence. And that is our nutritional needs. And in this way, we're compared to the animals. The davar zemaskila adam. And this comes to remind the human being, kihu ubehemas v'chayas hinime oisai hasuk, that humans and animals are both of the same kind. We're both sapiens. V'chevon shadayin ena muvan, sharei seif seif never because of ordu goimer, and because this is not yet so understood, meaning this comes to a shock. It comes as a shock to our system. We just were told how great we are, and we're told that we're going to be able to reign over everything else. Therefore, Himshich Rashi continues the Kasav, and he writes, V'loi hirshala adam al ishta lahamis berya v'lechal basar. Rashi delineates. I know, Rashi is saying, I know this is coming as a shock to you. So let me spell this out for you. Humanity was not permitted to kill an animal and eat its flesh. Meaning, biyachas lahamasas beria v'chilas psara, that regarding the killing of a creature, an animal creature, and eating its flesh, nitlo mina adam hakayach barashus lirdais al chayes avhemis. A person does not have permission to do that. This was taken from a person. And therefore, diek Rashi because of loy hirsha. Okay, with this, the Rebbe is answering one of the questions that were in the second group of questions, the specific questions. That's why Rashi says loy hirsha, they were not permitted. Instead of the term ne'esru, it was forbidden, or something like that. Ki hadgasha kanhi, because what Rashi wants to underscore here is not loy al isra achilas habasar. Rashi's main chiddush in this Rashi is not really on the menu items, on the fact that a person would not be able to eat meat, ella, but rather al perush teichen urdu. Really, what Rashi is explaining is the parameters of the term urdu, you will reign. What is included in this and what is not. That the word urdu, that you will reign, does not include the permission to kill an animal and to eat its flesh. This is very appropriate when we are all so sick of the kitchen, pots, pans, and food of all kinds. Move on, Gam Rashi. And now that we understand what Rashi is focused on and what Rashi really wants to explain here, so now it's understood the reason that Rashi says She'isra basahu rak lahamiz birya v'lechel basar, that what's forbidden is to kill the animal in order to eat its flesh. Because once we understand that the basis here is to limit from the person when it comes to their food, the ability to reign over animals that would also include killing them. So once you understand that that's the point of departure of Rashi's whole parish, hare move on, so it's understood that the prohibition is specifically on killing an animal in order to eat its meat. Because eating meat in that way, where you would go after the animal and kill it for its flesh, testifies that a person is in fact the Lord and the Shelet, the one who reigns over animals. So much so that a human being can kill them in order to eat flesh. But in contradistinction,
The ruler.
Dies on its own. But if you find an animal, you trip over an animal that died on its own, so this prohibition would not apply in that case. Once we understand what was bothering Rashi and what he is looking to explain, now we're in a position to also understand what Rashi does in his last part, where he talks about the B'nai Noach. You remember the Rebbe asked, why bring down the whole pasuk? If you are bringing down the whole pasuk, why leave out the middle part? And why bring the last part? So the Rebbe is going to explain that all here in Zion. La'achar hesafas Rashi shel b'nei Noach hutar basar. After Rashi adds, and the Rebbe explained why Rashi feels compelled to ask, because the Ben Chamish Lemikra is going to say, wait, I'm so confused. We do eat meat. Now you're teaching me that people are not allowed to eat meat. Okay, so Rashi has to add that. But after Rashi adds that, Oila Hakushya. Now there's a new question that arises. Ha'isr laham is basar b'kadei lahazir la'adam shelo yishkach she'af hu eina ela nivra kinal. The Rebbe explained that the prohibition of killing an animal in order to eat its flesh comes to warn a person that he should not forget that he's also a creation. We should not forget our limitations. We should not get all arrogant and in our head about how we're the boss. So now there's a new question. B'nai Noach don't need this warning. They don't need this prohibition. They don't need these parameters. They don't need this reminder. V'lachein Rashi herach b'dvarav. Therefore, Rashi gives us his perush in such elongated fashion. The he'etik as a kosov shabaynemar heter, and that's why he felt compelled to cite the verse where the permission is granted to eat, kach, and in doing so, aleph he'etik gam esiyum hakosov ki yerek esav. He cites the end of the pasuk, which says that meat will be to those people like vegetation. And he adds on top of that, that was permitted to Adam Arishon. That meat will now be permitted to B'nai Noach, like the Yerek Esav, like the vegetation that was permitted to Adam Arishon. What is Rashi trying to teach us with this? Bekach Ramaz Rashi, with this Rashi is alluding Sheheter Habasar Livnei Noach, that the allowance for Bnei Noach to eat meat, Einay mishum she'avuram ha'hagbala be'inyan urdu b'negei lamachal eina nagas. It's not because they don't conceptually, essentially need this limitation on the word urdu, that they need to know their place. They need to know where this begins and where this ends, that they will reign over animals. Elazeu heter, but rather that this is the granting of permission. In other words, the Eibishter unilaterally grants them permission, but it's not an indication that they are in any less need of this reminder. It's a heter mitzad oiseh hatam because of didan. Why are they being granted this permission? For the same reason that is given in this pasuk. Hainu, shatamai shavel latam shabiyarek esav shitartil adam arishon kedei sheyoichal liskayim oliyais bari. That Hashem is granting them this permission for the same reason that we were granted permission to eat vegetation, because we need to exist and we need to be healthy. Now, I think this begs a question to which I do not have an answer. Maybe somebody else does. I don't have an answer as to why, in order to exist and to be healthy, at a certain later point in history, the eating of meat has to be added to the diet. But what the Rebbe is explaining is that Rashi adds that pasuk to explain that this is an allowance based on the fact that people need to subsist on something. And just like earlier, they needed a vegetarian diet, now they will need a diet that is comprised of vegetation and also meat. And therefore, Hishmit Rashi's Atevas lachem yeh la'achla. It will be for you as food. Because what Rashi wants to drive with this, with bringing down that pasuk, is not the allowance to eat the meat, but the reason for the allowance. And what's the reason? That it's like the vegetation that I permitted Adam Arishon to eat. So the Rebbe answers all the questions that he raised, and I think we can understand the answer to the technical question about the pasuk. I personally am still left with a conceptual question, which is what changed in the constitution of humanity that made necessary allowance for eating meat. And maybe we don't know. And
Rivky,
the way it is. Yeah, Esther.
maybe after the flood, things changed in the way we live because of the weather. There's summer, winter. The Abish is going to keep the fall, the winter, but things changed. And maybe it is impossible in certain areas to always live on vegetation because due to the weather, vegetation just lasts so long, right? We don't have refrigeration. We don't have anything like that, right? And in certain areas, I don't know, in Alaska, they live on meat. So it could be that because after the flood, I'm just throwing this out. This is what, things changed to the point that you have to in certain areas, and it became okay for everyone. I don't know. I mean, you think Russia, you think that you couldn't live in many places without meat at certain times of the year. I don't know, just throwing that out.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting explanation. I mean, of course, it begs the question of why the Eibishter can't create an after-flood reality in which certain types of vegetation grow in all climates and in all places. I mean,
it must be, I'll feed to this, and the elevating, the Aliyah of the animals, the Eibishter ones, you know what I mean? It must be a lot more.
Sure. Yeah, that's for sure.
This is the bottom line. Not,
right. But it seems like it's saying that it was necessary for their constitution. I guess what I'm saying is it would be cool to learn like scientific you know what I'm saying? But yeah, you're 100% correct in everything you're saying. Ches. So what's the lesson in our Avodas Hashem? Ha'adgasha ha'amura, the above cited emphasis, sheyachad im kiyum urdu tzarech adam ladas ulahargish u'ena ela nivra, that with all of the greatness of humanity and all of our ingenuity and our brilliance, we need to remember, we need to know, and we need to feel that we are just creations. And the Rebbe says that this emphasis ain't a rak mishum shalidei zeh yishamer migayvo minyanim bilti ritzoyim halulim lavoi mitoy chavana mutois v'mashmos uridu. It's not just to guard against arrogance and hubris and all kinds of other unwanted results that arise from a flawed understanding of what it means or do, and you will reign over. It's not just to put us in our places and cut us down to size. It's to instruct us as to how it will work that we will actually reign over all other aspects of creation. Kasher Adam Savor She'urdu Perusha Shehu Harayde, when a person believes that the term Urdu actually means that he is the one who reigns, B'koichai ve'oitzim yadai, with his strength and the strength of his hands, and these are, of course, koichi ve'oitzim yadai, words from the Torah, Azai einhu yachal oid lirdais, then he loses the ability to reign. Sharei be'emes hishvalahem, because in truth, what Rashi's teaching is we are compared to animals. Va'af hu nivra kechol hanivroim, and the human being is a creation like all the others. The davka kasher hu zeiches emes, it's specifically when the human being remembers the truth, shehu shava l'chol hanivroim, that he is actually compared to all the other creations, and his ability to reign over other aspects of creation comes only and directly from Hashem. Then he could actually, and in truth, reign over the others. Because this is not his reigning, Ela Hashem Elokecha hu hanoisin l'chakoyach la'asois chayu. Because like the Torah says, it's Hashem, your God, who gives you the strength to be valorous, to do these things. Umemela, hardia v'hamemshala ha'amitis, hishal kadosh baruch hu, b'irei ha'adam manhigai. So the true reigning, the true sovereignty belongs to Hashem, the one who created humans and rules them and manhigai, please help me, somebody here. And orchestrates everything, huh?
Superior to them, like
Manhigai, what'd you say?
no, I'm saying it obviously means and to rule them, but I'm saying, are we superior to them?
And conducts them.
Conducts them, right, conducts them. Okaperish Rashi al v'yirdu bidgas hayam. And like Rashi says in the words, and you will reign over the fish of the sea, yesh b'lashon hazeh lashon ridu, v'lashon yirida. That the word v'yirdu contains etymologically allusion to both reigning and going down. Zacha roide. If human beings will merit it, they will reign. Lo zacha. But if human beings don't merit, nase yorud lifneim, we will become inferior before them. V'achaya meishelas, and the animal reigns over us. That Rashi says. Asher haperish hapnimi bazehu. And the Rebbe says, and what's the deeper understanding? Zacha miloshin zichuch. Zachach can be understood as etymologically related to refinement. Kasher adam mizachech atzmai, nasa naki mikol gaiva v'yeshus. When a person refines themselves so that they are cleansed of arrogance and that feeling of my existence and my importance. V'chol halichasa hirak mikoicha shel kadosh baruch hu. And everything that a person accomplishes, they realize and they feel that it's only the koyach of Hashem. Azai hu reida b'hem. Then human beings can reign over the animals. But when we're not zeicha, in this interpretation, we have not cleansed and refined ourselves to the extent that we need to. Vaidenu margish as yeshusai, and a person feels his self-existence, umitziasai, and the fact that he exists, umargish sheridiasai he mitzad kaichai, and he feels that the fact that he's able to reign over animals is because he is so strong. Azai nase yarud b'fneihem. Then humanity becomes inferior before the animals. It's not just that the human being becomes compared to animals on the same rung of the ladder, but actually becomes lower. We might say that this is also the innermost reason that as a continuation of the commandment that you will reign, the Rebbe says, and now we understand why these psukim that seemingly don't belong here in the creation story, that deal with what people are going to eat and what animals are going to eat, why does it have to be here? Now we understand it must follow the previous pasuk that says that you will reign, because it defines and explains the word or do. And it creates the parameters and the conditions under which this will occur. And on the other hand, when it won't. So it's only through these psukim of Chavtes and Lamed, we will get more information, and therefore it will be added to our understanding what Urdu means and what it doesn't mean. And from this comes a lesson to our times now. Amru Chazal. I think everybody can probably, in their minds, connect the dots. The Rebbe is kind of oblique here, but I think speaking very directly, it seems to me, to what we're going through now. Amru Chazal, Atem Kruyim Adam. The Gemara says, you are called Adam, Hainu, She'ikar Toyer Adam Nemar B'Yisrael. That in the main, the descriptor, the word Adam, concerns B'nai Yisrael. V'Kadosh Baruch Hu mitzav Yisrael urdu. And Hashem commands B'nai Yisrael, you shall reign. U'kamoshe ne'amar, and like it says in the Navi Yeshayahu, v'amdu zarim v'ro'u tzeinchem. Strangers will stand, and they will take care of your flocks. They will be the ones who will do your work. Hainu, shebnei Yisrael yirdu bahem b'negei lemlacha, meaning that Bnei Yisrael will reign over the other nations when it comes to work that has to be done. And that is a pasuk from Yeshayahu that describes the time of Mashiach. The Rebbe says, "Va'af bizman hagolus." But even now, in the time of Golus, Kashar Umois Hinim Mulachim V'Sarim, when the other nations are the kings, and the other nations are the princes and the lords. Hine kenemar v'hayu malachim amnayech v'sariseyem minikasayech. It's still possible, and this is also from Yeshayahu, and also about the time to come, that the kings will be your craftspersons, and the princesses will be your wet nurses. The Rebbe says that although these psukim, on the face of it, are descriptions of Mashiach's time, but this can already occur earlier. And so here's the lesson. Kasher Adam Saimech al Kaichi Veitzim Yadi, Vafilu Kashu Taila Zais B'Yesa Adam El Elyain. When a person relies on the strength of his hands, and even when he connects it and he hinges his abilities, his power and prowess on the fact that he is a person and he's Adam Elyain, he is compared to God, Baal Mailis Gedailis, and he has so many great superlative characteristics. V'hainu she'elu ma'aloi sof shaloi, and he understands them to be his characteristics, meaning not that they're granted and gifted to him by a higher power, but they're his. Azai loi zacha v'hachaya mashelas bai. When a person believes them to be their own source of greatness, self-generated greatness, then they're not zeicha, they're definitely not refined, and the animals reign over them. Not only do the other nations not relate to Bnei Yisrael in a way of giving them honor and respect, as they would if they believed that Bnei Yisrael reign over them, it's on the contrary. It's the exact opposite. Not only do they not respect us, but they seem to be reigning over us. And what this causes is that the Jew begins to feel inferior before the Goyim. So two things happen, the Rebbe says. Number one, the Jew feels despondent and depressed, and also embraces the winds, the zeitgeist of the Goyim, the way they think, the way they conduct themselves generally. The davka kasher zacha, and it's only and specifically when the Yid is refined. Shemizachich atzmei v'yadea ki Hashem halakecha hu hanaisin l'chakayach las ischayil. When the Jew knows that it's only Hashem your God who gives you the strength to be successful and to do valor in war, and therefore the Jew is not going with the strength of his smarts and his understanding, but rather lahabdil with Hashem's chachma, haTorah, Hashulchan Aruch, shenoyeg al pi harois Hashem. But he goes with the chachma v'Kadosh Baruch Hu, which is the Torah, the Shulchan Aruch, that teaches us how to comport ourselves based on Hashem's instructions. And the Yid goes with the strength of who sent him, the Eibishter. Azai huroide, then he is able to reign. V'roya begoloi, and he's able to see in revealed manner the fruition, kiyum v'hayu malachim amnayech, that the kings will be your craftspersons. Ait bisman hagalus, you could already see it even in the time of galus. Ad lekiyum until he sees the coming to fruition of the words Va'amtu Zarim V'Ro Tzeinchem, that strangers will stand, they will be the ones that will deal with your flocks. They will be the I'm losing my words. They will take care of the flocks, the shepherds, thank you. Bevias Mashiach Tzidkenu, with the coming of Mashiach. So this last part, Tess, just sounds very eerily like it's an instruction to the leaders in Israel today, the leaders of the IDF, and this is a point that the Rebbe hammered over and over and over again, that Israel shouldn't talk about its vaunted army and how amazing they are, and so on and so forth, but should remember that it's all from the Eibishter. And forgive me, I'm not feeling well at all, and not doing